Welcome to Mom Boss Central. I'm your host, Alexia Hoffman. This podcast is where entrepreneurial moms like you and me come together for real and raw conversations filled with practical tips, genuine stories, and a whole lot of girl power. But it's not just about listening, it's about building a community. If you haven't already, make sure to join at mombosscentral.com. So whether you're sipping on a cup of coffee, pouring yourself a glass of wine, or tuning in on the go, get ready to join the conversation and become part of our supportive Mom Boss Central community. I'm here with Tara. Tara, welcome to Mom Boss Central. We are so excited to have you on. Will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. And also, I love the name Mom Boss Central because moms really are the boss of like everything, even
Heck
if we don't want to be.
Exactly.
We're the ones that run the world. So
Oh, I love it.
Love it.
Well,
And I'm
thank you.
thrilled to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you on. So for our listeners who aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, and your family.
Yeah, so I'm a personal trainer. I've been a personal trainer for 21 years. I love what I do, and I work mostly with women who are on a fertility journey, who are pregnant or postpartum. I myself have been all three of those things, currently 3.5 years postpartum. I have one son. His name is Maverick, and he is a handful, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
Something kind of interesting about me is I speak at fitness events. So I teach trainers how to be trainers, and I just wrote a book.
Very cool.
A lot going on.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And I think it's so cool that you shared how long you've been in the industry, because that definitely gives the context of what came first, right? Business or baby. So
Yep.
With that being said, having your son 3.5 years ago, you were obviously very well established in the industry. You'd been doing it for a long time. So how was the adjustment of becoming a mom while also being an entrepreneur and integrating that into your business that was already established?
Yeah, so my business has really evolved over the years. I was not an entrepreneur that entire time. And truly, I really just started my entrepreneurial journey about 6 years ago. So yes, I was like firmly entrenched as like, who I am by the time my son came along. But it's just been growing and changing from there. It's not something I ever set out to do. But opportunities come up, and sometimes you just got to say yes to stuff.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. And I actually love being an entrepreneur because I feel like it's really easy to fit my baby into my life. Not the other way around. Like I didn't change my life to fit my baby. I fit him in.
Yeah.
And of course, like priorities change, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was never planning to be a stay-at-home mom. And about 9 weeks into maternity leave, I realized like I will go nuts if I just stay home all the time.
Yeah.
Shout out to the stay-at-home moms out there because you guys are the true rock stars. I can't even imagine how you do it.
Seriously, the hardest job of them all.
The absolute hardest job. And I had my son right at the beginning of COVID. He was a July 2020 baby. So there was like this whole other part of new mamahood going on there that had its own challenges and struggles, of course. But I actually love it because, my clients, most of them are moms. So if my kid gets sick, like, hey guys, I'm sorry, I have to cancel today. Can we make it up tomorrow? Can we make it up this other day?
Yeah.
And everybody's really super cool about it.
Yeah.
And it allows me to be a mom first and still kind of live up to my full potential as a career woman too.
Yeah.
And have that like fulfilling side of my career.
Definitely. Yeah, that's amazing. And I think like hearing you talk about, you adjusted your life to your son. I think that's so great that you're able to do that. And that is one of the flexibilities that being an entrepreneur allows us. But also that can come with some struggles of figuring out how to balance how much time to your son, how much time to your business, and how you said your priorities changed. So can you share a little bit about how you navigated balancing those things or integrating those things and what it looked like for you?
It's a constant struggle, and it's always being kind of like tweaked, in my opinion. As an entrepreneur, you're never really off. But I tried to set really firm boundaries when I went back to work after having my son, where I was like, I'm never going to come to work before 7 a.m. and I'm never going to leave after 5 p.m.,
Mm,
which is 10 hours, right? So it's not like I'm not working
yeah.
here.
Yeah, definitely.
And frequently, like today, I didn't go until 8:30 and I'm off at, like 2,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not every day is that long. Um, but I had to set really firm boundaries for myself because I know me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the kind of person who, like, if somebody needs help and it's outside of my business hours, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
So I had to get really like harsh with myself and say, hey, these are your work times. And then I'm really, really strict about having 5 p.m. till 8 p.m. be like family time.
Yeah.
I've made my first exception ever to that rule about a month ago. I decided I was going to take an adult hip hop dance class on Thursdays.
That is so fun. I love
So
it.
for like 45 minutes a week, I go dance or try to dance. I'm not good at all, you
I
know.
love that. That's so fun.
But that's something that I really feel strongly about doing for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah,
Like I think it's really important that we show our kids that we matter too,
definitely.
and that it's not just about serving others, although that's amazing and a huge part of like my core values. Like I need my son to see that it's okay for mom to go do something for herself.
Definitely. I think that translates to so much of what we do as entrepreneurs is following that passion can feel so scary and sometimes restrictive to um, our family time or our work time, but it does need to be a priority because our kids are watching and they will see, if we don't prioritize ourselves, how can they believe they have the space to validate what they need and to make space and room for that. So I think that's so great that you're doing that. And I also know how difficult it can be to take what feels like take away from family time. But I also think we show up as a better mom when we have that time for ourselves because it fills up our own cup and then we can pour into someone else.
Yes.
So I think that's definitely huge. I want to go back to the boundaries you put around your time because I think that is so important and also so difficult, especially for newer entrepreneurs to navigate, especially when it comes to saying no to money producing activities. So for you in the fitness industry, I'm sure you run into certain people that aren't able to utilize you as their trainer with the time restrictions you put on. So how did you have the confidence to do that and to stay firm on that boundary?
That was really hard for me. In the beginning, it was a little easier, I think, because you come back from maternity leave and it was COVID,
Mhm.
right? So not all of my clients were back
Yeah.
yet. So it was a little bit easier for me to be like, this is the time that I
Yeah.
work. Now I feel like I do have a lot of people who want to come at like 5, 6, 6:30 in the morning
Yeah.
or 5, 6, 6:30 at night.
Yeah.
And I've been like thinking like, should I adjust my hours, whatever. But I really feel like that's a boundary that I don't want to change. I don't want to move the goalpost there,
Mhm.
because my family is so important to me that at some point I just had to kind of adopt this like abundance mindset
Mm.
of, you know what, like there are plenty of people out there in the world. And of those people, there are a ton that need personal training, or body image coaching or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
right? And they need to work within my
Yeah.
constraints, and I found that once I like committed to that, um, my client book got
Yeah.
full. My client book got full where I wanted it to be full. Like you can burn the candle at both ends, but it just means it burns out faster,
Definitely. Yeah, I
you
love that.
know?
That's such a good analogy because I think that's so true to getting started in business and like identifying your ideal avatar. I know with a lot of like my coaching clients and when I'm speaking to people, even when I rebranded myself, I found myself at a point I was like, who am I really speaking to? Because after I had my kids, I was selling real estate. I was trying to get into like a coaching space and I found myself like also trying to recruit because I'm a broker. So I'm trying to get people to like join my office, all the things, join my team. And I was like, okay, I am creating content that is valuable to no one because I'm not clear on who I'm speaking to and what that value is. And I think it's the same with like setting the boundaries in your calendar, because it's like, okay, if you have your books totally open and anybody can train with you, right? For you, or for like me, if it was like, I'll coach anybody and everybody, like it just doesn't,
Mhm.
you can't provide as much value when you're speaking to a broad audience. And to newer entrepreneurs, I know it can feel so scary and like restrictive to say, this is who I want to be working with. But I truly think that people can identify themselves when you're super specific. That's how like you find your people and the ones that you're going to resonate with, versus casting such a wide net, because then nobody can say, oh, she's speaking to me, and I think that's a huge part of
Yes.
like how you fill your calendar is you have to be super specific of, I'm working with postpartum moms or moms struggling with infertility, or whatever it may be. It's like, okay, I can see myself in that. I want to coach with Tara. But if if you're like, hey, I'll coach anybody and everybody, I think it would take you a lot longer to fill your books with that mentality. Personally, that's my take on it. So have you?
Yeah, I completely agree. You like want to be the obvious choice for
Yeah,
people, not just a good
yeah,
choice.
yeah,
You
definitely.
want to make it so they have to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, as hard as it is to niche, and to be honest, it took me like decades to niche
Mm,
myself. And I was busy before that. That's not to say it didn't work being a
yeah,
generalist, so to speak, but um, it was a little bit scary to do
definitely.
that. So it took me a long time. But now it's like, man, if there's women in my area looking for those types of things, I'm the only choice for
Yeah,
them.
that's amazing. How did you transition to that? Did you like slowly start building your clientele, or did you cold turkey say, "Hey, I'm only trading with these people"?
Oh, I did it slowly. To be honest, I still have like a bunch of menopausal type
Yeah.
women, senior women that I work with just because I
Yeah.
like them.
Yeah.
You know, I actually love the variety in working with different people. But of course, my passion is with like the moms,
Yeah.
right? Because society overlooks us, man. We're invisible
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. I think
I just feel like moms deserve more than what we demand for ourselves
so good.
and what society just gives
Yeah.
us. So I really try to focus on that demographic so that I can like show them that they're seen, that they're heard, and that there are better ways than what society tells us
Oh my
there are.
gosh, that's so good. I love that because like you said, just we deserve more than we demand for ourselves. I think that is so important for us to hear and really think about. Like, if we were speaking to someone else, we would set the bar higher for them a lot of the times than we set it for ourselves. And so I think that,
Yeah.
to look at it as it translates to not just our personal lives, but also what we're pursuing in business, what we're pursuing in motherhood, what we're pursuing in our family, even to really set that standard high and claim what we deserve and give ourselves the space to follow our passions, whether that be a business venture or a hip hop dance class.
Absolutely. And you know what? I feel like so many of us have a hard time doing that because we feel guilty about
Mm-hmm.
it, right? Like the mom
Yeah.
guilt is so
Yeah.
real. But the way that I look at this is like, man, I need to be a good example of this for my children, for my son. If I had a daughter, I don't want her to grow up and be a mom and feel like she can't take care of herself because she needs to be there cooking dinner every single
Yeah.
night.
Yeah. That's
Like,
huge.
hey, you know what? Thursday night, dad can
Yeah.
get it.
Seriously.
He can figure it out.
I think that is such a big piece of it, is like being the example, like how you want your kids to go out in the world and what you want them to tolerate. Like you have to model that.
Yes.
And I felt like I went through a big thing with my family, even just once I had kids, like what I would and wouldn't tolerate and how I responded within our family system. And like, there was things that before people would say like, oh, that's just how that person is. And it's like, well, no, I'm not going to
Yes.
tolerate that anymore, because I don't want my kids to think that they have to tolerate that. And given my kids were babies, less than a year old, so it's not like they heard and knew.
Hmm.
But for me, it was the principle of setting the standard of what I would not want them to tolerate that I could no longer tolerate for myself. And I think that's, I think, one of the unspoken ways having kids really just changes your mindset on things, is like, okay, I don't want them to tolerate that, so I am no longer responding the way I once did, because I have to hold myself to a higher standard.
100% the same way. In my family, I've had to set a lot of standards talking about what other people are
Mm,
eating and what other people's bodies look like.
yeah.
I grew up where it was very acceptable to talk about somebody's body and how it's changed or what they're eating or what they're not
Mm,
eating. And now that I'm a mom, I'm like,
yeah.
absolutely not. Somebody else's body is none of our business, so we don't talk
Yeah.
about
That's
it.
huge. That's so important.
Some of the families having a harder time adjusting than
Yeah.
others,
Yeah.
but we're making
Yeah.
progress.
And I think that's like a big part of it too, is like being firm on your boundaries, but also giving grace to those who don't have poor intentions, but don't necessarily
Yes.
have that propelling component towards change.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's a hard line for me with my family, is like, okay, well, what's their intention behind it? Because obviously I'm the one who had the life change. They didn't. So their mindset hasn't shifted. And all I can do is speak what I like, put the boundary in for myself, not for them. But trying to navigate like what I will and won't give grace on, even like, is to look at, for me, the intention behind it. And sometimes it
Yeah.
takes a little bit longer for someone to grasp the idea. But also, if someone's not making any intention to, it's like, sometimes we have to put a hard line and say, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't continue to like pour into this relationship. At least for me, that was a hard realization, was like, I'm not going to continue to pour into a relationship if the respect that I deserve is not reciprocated.
I'll give you an example of how I used like education. I sometimes feel like people don't mean
Mm-hmm.
badly, right? Like I believe that most people mean
Yeah.
well, but it's not always like resulting in the result that
Yeah.
we want. So we know that like 85% of girls have been on a diet before
Oh
age
my
10.
gosh.
Like, that is a shocking statistic
Yeah.
to me, and when I shared that with, like, friends and family, like, "Hey, this is why I don't wanna talk about good foods and bad foods and
Yeah.
bodies and why this body's good and why this body's
Yeah.
not good," because 85% of girls are on a diet before they're
It's
10 years old.
wild.
Like, 10 is so young, they're babies and they're
Yeah.
dieting.
So sad.
Like, once I share, like, some little nugget like that, I find that I have people jump on board easier than if I just said, "Hey, please don't talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that."
I think that's so
You know?
impactful to hear, and truly so sad. I mean, I have 3 daughters. So obviously that's something
Yeah.
so wild to think about. And I also look back at, how I was raised, and my parents really prioritized health. Like, gym was a huge part of their life. And I obviously
Yes.
value,
Love
yeah,
that.
and I value like staying active. And I know their intentions were good, but how it translated wasn't always healthy. Like, my dad really encouraged
Yeah.
me to go to the gym at a really young age. Like, before I could legally get a gym membership, he was like, you should be going to the gym. And like, what I heard was, okay, my body is not good enough. I need to go make changes. I didn't hear like, oh, he wants me to be
Yes.
active and like healthy and pursue the lifestyle that he gets energy from, which is truly what it was. Like, I can look back and see
Mhm.
that, but it did create, especially from my dad, right? I'm an only child. My father figure is telling me I need to work out. How I perceived that was, I'm not good how I am. And so I think it's,
Yeah.
being really intentional with what we're saying, and like also being aware of our child's perspective and how it can be interpreted instead of just what we're saying, because they don't have the same lens that we do. And I think sometimes like what we say can come across in a way we don't intend it, without realizing that, and like vocalizing, like you said, sharing the statistic to give the context of what you're truly trying to say, instead of leaving room for interpretation.
I mean, honestly, their brains don't develop fully until they're like in their
Yeah.
late 20s. We can't expect them to be at the same standard of, logicalness
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
are.
So what would you say to a parent
So,
who's like struggling with encouraging their child to make healthy habits in a way that doesn't create shame or a feeling of failure or not being good enough?
so hard, right? Because so many parents do want to make healthy changes, and I will say that I think the earlier you start, the better. That way, it's not this big like change. Like, we're not having Cheetos, we're having
Yeah, yeah.
carrots. Because like anybody who's had carrots and Cheetos knows that that's not a
Yeah,
great
seriously.
substitute, right? Um, so something that I do is I follow a very like intuitive eating approach with my son. In fact, I have to give a shout out to my girl, Elizabeth Harris. She's a dietitian that I found on Instagram. And she has a Raising Intuitive
Oh,
Eaters
wow.
course that talks about like how to offer food to your child. And I'll tell you guys okay, so I did her course and her like thing is just offer all foods
Uh-huh.
as equal. Don't be like, here, if you eat all your veggies, then you can have an ice cream
Oh,
cone. Like, it's not like that. It's put everything on the plate and let the kid pick and choose. And I said, girlfriend, there is no way on earth if I put dessert on his plate that he's going to eat all the
yeah.
other food and then eat the dessert. Like, he's just going to eat the dessert and be full
Yeah.
and leave. And she was like, just try it. And I said, okay. So I made a meal of like salmon, green beans, like garlic bread, and then
Uh-huh.
chocolate pudding. Right? It was like a very wide variety of food on the plate. And my son literally went in like a little circle and just took a bite of
Oh my
all the
gosh.
things like 4 or 5 times. And then he was done and he left, some of it on his plate,
Yeah.
including the pudding. And I was like,
Wow.
what? Because if that had been me, I would have like scarfed down the pudding and then forced the
Yeah.
salmon down,
Yeah. That's so interesting.
but if we start our kids so early without judgment, without giving food
Yeah.
morality, right? There's no good foods and bad foods, it's
Yeah.
just food. I really think that kids will grow up and like I'm hopeful that in a couple generations, we won't be having conversations
Yeah.
like this,
Yeah.
right? Because it'll just be the
Mm-hmm.
norm. But I do think if you want to make changes with your children's habits in whatever way, just making
Mm-hmm.
it fun and making it not based in diet culture, because diet culture is so rampant and it tells us that like skinny is
Mm-hmm.
healthy when in reality we can't
Yeah.
see health,
Yeah.
right? We're not Superman. We're not looking into somebody's body and seeing what's
Yeah.
going on in there. Um, just kind of offering choices and letting your body tell you, like, hey, I felt really good when I ate that, or I didn't feel good after that. And then using that as kind of a guideline metric for the next time you
Yeah.
eat
I
that
really
food.
like that.
Maybe you eat it and you just eat a
Yeah,
little bit less,
definitely. I really like that. And
right?
I think it is, there's so many different conversations about how we should look at food. And I think that is just creates shame. It's like at the end of the day, like if you
Yes.
truly listen to your body, and I mean, I know there's exceptions to the rule with, conditions and disorders, but overall, like for me, if I
Sure.
listen to my body, like I'm going to hit a point where it's like, okay, I'm not going to continue to eat the junk because it doesn't feel good. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes we forget that because we're conditioned to believe like, oh, we have to, like you said, it's a bad food. But it's like, okay, if I eat Taco Bell and McDonald's and drive through meal after meal after meal, eventually I'm not going to want it anymore. My body's going to crave something that
Yeah.
that is more nutritious. And like it's okay if I have, if I'm craving McDonald's, and maybe this is not the right thing to say, but truly for me, I believe like, okay, if I crave McDonald's, it's not going to kill me to have that, a couple times. And I think it does go into back to that moderation and balance. Like I think if I
Yeah.
were to be restrictive of myself, it's going to cause more problems with my mindset and with the diet culture, than if I just allowed myself to, okay, can I go and eat something in moderation instead of like binging? I've done Whole30 a handful of times. And truthfully, I know for some people it's great. And I think, healthy eating is important. And I learned a lot about my body through that. However, I will say every time I've done Whole30, the day I'm done, I don't integrate foods back into my diet. I'm like, oh, I made it 30 days. I'm eating a full pizza and ice cream and everything else. And now I'm going to be sick for multiple days instead of just like trying to create healthier habits in the first place. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that intuitive eating. I think that's,
I could do a whole episode on just
yeah,
dieting and weight stigma and diet
yeah.
culture for sure. But something that I see a lot is when people go, oh, I really want to have some like ice cream after dinner. But instead of eating the ice cream, I'm going to
Ugh,
have a yogurt. Like that's
it's
pretty
not
close.
close.
And then the yogurt's
Yeah,
not satisfying. I
not
know,
at all.
right? It's not close. So that's not satisfying. So then they'll be like, well, maybe I'll have a banana too. And then pretty soon they've eaten like
Yeah.
4 or 5 things, none of which are satisfying. And by the way, they're not full. I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
they're hungry, right? They're just
Yeah.
unsatisfied. So it would have actually been healthier for them to probably eat that little bit of ice cream than to have the 600 calories of all the other quote unquote
Yeah.
healthy
Yeah.
stuff.
That's a good point.
Right? Like when we deny like that, it just is setting ourselves up for
Yeah,
binging and for
that's so
failure.
true. So for somebody
So
kind of on the flip side of our conversation about helping our kids be healthy, how can we integrate healthy habits as busy entrepreneurial moms? Like what is a good first step someone can take if they want to pursue a healthier lifestyle, not in the context of shame, but in the context of like foods that fuel our body and feel good?
yeah, so this is something that so many of us, myself included, completely struggle with because we're
Yeah.
busy, right? Like we're entrepreneurial moms. So I think meal prepping is great. And I do not do meal prepping like, oh, here, let me get out all my little
Mhm.
Tupperwares and pack the same thing for 5 days. I do it in the context of I make dinner at night and then I make enough for me to have the
Mhm.
next day for lunch. And that's
Yeah,
how
I
I
love
meal
that.
prep. Because I'm not going to eat like a 5 day
Yeah,
old piece of
same.
salmon. That's gross.
Yeah.
You know? So I prioritize like cooking at home if
Mm.
possible. On the weekends we usually go out for dinner or lunch or something, but during the week I try to be really like consistent with I cook a healthy meal at home, and I try to make sure that it includes a wide variety of foods, lots of
Yeah.
fruits, lots of veggies, lots of grains, lots of protein. Like I want
Yeah.
all of it in there. And I notice on days that I don't
Mhm.
include something,
Yeah.
I'm unsatisfied. And that's when I will go looking for treats after dinner because my little piece of steak with some green beans was delicious, but there was no starch or
Yeah.
carbs in that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, green beans are carbs, but they're not starch. So it just wasn't as satisfying for me. So I try to make sure that I include all of that. And then I honestly believe that most women think we have to work out way more than
Mm.
we actually do. So honestly, if you do 20 minutes of weightlifting
Yeah.
like twice a week,
Yeah.
you're
That's
good.
awesome.
You're good. That's all you need. And I'm talking
Yeah.
about for health, right? For health and healthy body image, lifting weights twice a week for 20 to 30
Mhm.
minutes is plenty. If you want to be like a bodybuilder and step on the stage, or if you're a competitive athlete or something,
Yeah.
very different story. But for most of us that are like running our own businesses,
Yeah.
running our own families, like we can fit in
Yeah.
20 minutes
Yeah,
somewhere.
definitely. I think that is interesting too. So, as a trainer, I would be curious because I've heard a lot, and I'm sure some people know if there's a right answer or not, but regarding cardio versus weightlifting, what
Yeah.
is that healthy balance, or what is ideal regarding health?
So you need both for sure. Cardio is strengthening our heart and lungs. It's strengthening our blood vessels, circulatory system. We need that in order to help prevent things like heart attacks, diabetes, strokes, high
Mhm.
cholesterol, high blood pressure, right? Like cardio is going to keep us healthy for the long term. So you definitely want to be doing that. Anything where you're out of breath and
Okay.
sweaty counts. So if it's like putting the baby in a stroller and taking a walk, if it's shoveling snow out of your driveway because you live in Michigan and it snowed in
Yeah.
March, you know, if it's like having some bedroom gymnastics
Yeah.
after bedtime and you're out of breath and sweating, all of
I don't
this
know if you meant
counts.
that, which way you meant
You
that,
don't
bedroom
have to.
gymnastics, but I love that. I'm going to steal that.
I'm going to let you use that however you
I
see
don't know
fit.
if that's what you meant, but I'm taking it that way, and I'm going to run with
That's
it.
probably how I
Perfect.
meant it.
Oh, that's so good.
As long as you're out of breath and sweaty, it totally counts. And I mean, in a perfect world, we want to be doing that like a half an hour
Okay.
most days of the week, right? But you get benefits
Yeah.
even from 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You get benefits, especially if you're doing it
Oh,
after a
okay.
meal. Like if you ate lunch and then you went for a walk, like we see a ton of like
Mm.
insulin response there, and blood sugar
Yeah.
regulation that's really helpful. So if you don't have diabetes, that's not something you need to worry about. I call that mowing your grass while your house is on fire. Like you have much
Yeah.
bigger priorities
Yeah.
if that's the case, right? But
Yeah.
it's helpful. So if I had to be like, okay, perfect world, how much exercise are we doing for
Mhm.
like a busy mom? I would say walking twice a week for 20 minutes, lifting twice
Okay.
a week for
Love it.
20 minutes. And you can do them on the same day. If you do them at the same time, do your lifting first and then
That's
your
good.
cardio.
That's good to know. Why is that?
So when you lift, there's a molecule.
Yeah, let's
ready to
do
go
it.
sciencey with me? There's a molecule called adenosine triphosphate. And if you think back to like chemistry class, you've got like this adenosine molecule with like the single bond or, double bond. And there's 3 phosphate molecules that are like hanging off the side of it, right? So our body breaks one of those phosphate molecules off and uses that reaction for energy to fuel muscle movement for the first 3 seconds of movement. And you're probably thinking 3 seconds, what the heck? And then we have creatine come into play. You guys have heard of creatine, right? So in the body, it's creatine phosphate, and creatine phosphate's like the ultimate wingman, right? He's always got this phosphate molecule here hanging on him, and he comes over to his adenosine diphosphate friend because he only has 2 phosphate molecules, right? So he'll give him his extra phosphate because he's like, oh, I can pick up phosphates anywhere. Bro, I know you struggle in the club, so here, have my phosphate. And then we get energy for like 10 seconds. So that's really super important because most of our weightlifting exercises can be done in like 10-ish seconds, whereas cardio is not, right? We need like 10 or 20 or 30 minutes of cardio. So if we do the cardio first, we're going to use up some of that ATP. We won't get an effective weightlifting workout. So like the long story short of that is if you lift weights last, you won't have as much ATP and it won't be as effective.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes too, I'll be like, oh, I still have some energy left after my cardio. Should I be lifting weights? But very rarely after I I guess it makes sense to think about like, can I do 5 minutes of weightlifting before I do my cardio just to have something and maybe feel better about the weightlifting that I'm doing then and have a little more energy there. So that's good to know.
Yeah, totally. We'll say like, dude, if you're only going to do it after your cardio, then do it then. It's more important to just do it no matter when it is, whether it's in the morning, the evening, before, after, fueled, unfueled, just do it. But perfect case scenario, you would like warm up, do your weightlifting, then do your cardio, then stretch, then shower.
Love it. That's so good. Super tangible stuff, Tara. I really appreciate everything that you've shared. And I love that you're part of the Mom Boss Central community. I think you're so badass and so fun to chat with. So for people who want to connect with you, where can they find you and what do you offer?
So 3 main places that I like to hang out. First, I have Instagram. It's at Tara DeLeon Fitness.
Yes,
and we'll link that in the show notes. Thank you. And I have my own podcast actually called Wellness Rebranded, and it does talk a lot about the things that we dove into today. So if you liked this conversation, that's a good place to hang out too. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, basically it's a personal trainer, a dietitian, and a mental health therapist talking about what's actually wellness and what is diet culture run amok, what society tells us is wellness, what's actually
so
not.
Important.
So we talk a lot about that. And then lastly, I mentioned in the beginning that I wrote a book. It comes out April 2nd. So Hot Mess to Hot Mom, Transformational Tools for Thriving After Childbirth and Beyond. And I would honestly be so bold to say this book would be helpful for like any woman ever, because I think many of us are on the same struggle bus, regardless of if we have kids or not. Like most of us are the ones who carry the mental load in the family. Most of us are the ones who, kind of struggle to put ourselves first, regardless of if we're a mother or not. So I've got the way that I laid the book out was with a little story for each chapter and then a tool. So if you're too busy to like read the book, which by the way, it's short, it won't take you long. It's an easy read. You could just flip to the tool section of each chapter and be like, oh, cool. I needed a 20-minute weight workout to do twice a week.
That is so great. Yeah. Such awesome work, Tara. Thank you for contributing to the Mom Boss Central community. And so excited to tap into your podcast and read your. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Mom Boss Central. I hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and maybe even a few new strategies to rock your mom boss journey. Remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. And don't forget to share the love with your fellow mom bosses. Make sure to join the community at mombosscentral.com. It's completely free and a space to connect with like-minded women. All you have to do is sign up and start connecting. Until next time, keep pursuing your passions and living authentically. We're so happy to have you as part of the Mom Boss Central community.